Good morning, everyone. Good to see you today. If you've got a Bible, please just turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 11. That's on page 678. 678. Just give the mums and dads a little chance to get back in after taking the children along. We're getting towards the end of this interesting book. Maybe it's sparked some questions for you. Maybe it's caused you some anxieties. We'd love to just tease out some of these things with you. So if you've got questions at the end of this, please don't just go away and bin them. Maybe that these questions have been raised in your mind by God. Imagine that. Imagine that God should take the trouble to raise in our minds some of the really big questions for our life. Well, we would encourage you to follow through on that and pick them up. So let's have a look at this chapter. And our prayer is that somehow we would hear God's voice today. Your perspective, your viewpoint, the way you look at life. Some of us look at life as football supporters, or maybe you view life as a kind of techie kind of person. You know, you're very comfortable in the world of USBs and gigabytes and all the rest. Or maybe you're a bit of a traveller. You know, you've been around the world a bit. You like to talk about the places you visited. Now, whatever is true of all those different perspectives, the one thing you can say about them all is that we like to sound as though we know what we're talking about. You don't often hear people say, "Hey, well, mate, I just don't know what it's all about." We have that kind of sense, don't we? That we like to think we know what's what. Ecclesiastes is a book that wants to impress upon us that when it comes to the really important stuff, we really don't know very much. I don't know if you saw the news last week. The Wednesday of last week, I was watching the news, and the scene was of four of the most powerful people in the world. So there was Donald Trump with his wife, sitting next to Barack Obama, sitting next to Bill Clinton, sitting next to George W. Bush in a row. These are people who are massively powerful, or who are massively powerful, who are deferred to, who people go to for advice, who set policy, who set direction. But none of them were saying anything. Nobody was holding a press conference. The whole place was dominated by this flag-draped coffin right in the middle of the room. The coffin of one of their predecessors, George H.W. Bush. They were at his funeral. They were in this church. Now my guess is that they weren't wanting to show you how much they knew in that setting. The presence of death kind of casts a big shadow over our lives and says to us, do you know what? You don't know very much about the really important stuff. Now I say that because the perspective of Ecclesiastes is not the football supporter. It's not the techie, not the geeky kind of guy. The perspective of the book of Ecclesiastes is the funeral parlour, the crematorium. Do you remember chapter 7 verse 4? Better to go to the house of mourning. The heart of the wisdom, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. The heart of the fool is in the house of pleasure. Okay? Imagine if you were going to go and sit for a day in Morton Hall Crematorium. What you might learn. The writer of the Ecclesiastes would say, hey, this might not be a bad place to go. Have a look at your Bible. We're going to read first. We're going to read the first 5 verses together. So this is what it says. Listen to this. Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 1. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. Clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there will it lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant, whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. So your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hand not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Did you hear the kind of refrain that goes through that little section? You do not know. You do not know when disaster will come. You do not know the ways of God. You do not know what will succeed and what will not succeed. Do you see what he's doing to us? Kind of sits us down. So let's imagine we sit in the crematorium at Morton Hall for a day. Well, I guess you would see some funerals of people who had lived long lives and all their family are there and everyone is kind of giving thanks for them. But there'll be others that would just be places of great sadness and distress at somebody cut down in the prime of life. You do not know when disaster will come. This month will be 30 years. On the 21st of December, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 flew over Lockerbie and blew up. 259 people on board all lost their lives, and 11 people who were watching the telly in Lockerbie also lost their lives. You don't know when disaster will come. The plane was full of Americans heading back for Christmas, looking forward to being reunited with their families. Boom. No one reaches home. Now, of course, terrorist atrocities are fairly rare, but terminal illness and accidents are not rare. We don't know the future. We are not in control of events. Security is not found in money or family or health. Let's just underline that for you today. Security is not found in money or family or health. Look at the next thing we don't know. It's in verse 5. We don't know how to do the things that only God can do. So we can build wind farms, but we cannot control when the wind will blow and when it will not blow. We can devise ultrasound machines that can view a baby growing in the womb of her mother, but we've got no idea how cells divide and one becomes an ear and another becomes a foot. We cannot do the things that only God can do. God does those things. He forms living beings in the wombs of their mothers. He is the maker of all things. Now we have our questions about God, don't we? Questions about injustice or inequality, or maybe questions about suffering. Issues that we think call into question the competence and the goodness of God. But here's the thing that Ecclesiastes wants you and I to get to grips with. I dare not make my own rationality and understanding the judge of what God does. We're not smart enough for that. So this little book of Ecclesiastes comes in a section of the Bible known as wisdom literature. And another of the books in this section is called Job. It's the first one. It's the story of a man who suffers. Who suffers, as I can say with absolute confidence, no one in this room, none of us, have begun to taste the suffering that Job experienced. He is a good man. He's a godly guy. Whenever his children hold a feast, the next day he's up early to pray that they might not have sinned against God. That's how godly he is. And yet this man will lose all his family, will lose all his wealth, and will have his health removed from him. And he has questions about what God's up to. He doesn't become an atheist. He doesn't say, well, I've had enough of God. I'm fed up with the whole thing. No. He goes banging on God's door for an explanation. And he's met with silence. God is not speaking to him in most of the book. And when he eventually shows up, when God eventually opens the door and answers Job's questions, he does not arrive to explain what has happened. Job is met by a barrage of questions that emphasize to him who he is. Let me just give you a little taste of it. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" What a question, eh? Where were you, Job, when I was making the earth? It goes on in that kind of vein. And then he goes on to speak about how incredibly able he is to govern and direct the world. Do you know when the mountain goat gives birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? Now here's the thing. At the end of this, Job doesn't go, "Do you know what? I've just had enough of this." At the end of this process, he is forced to bow down in amazing worship at this God. As he gets a little glimpse of the absolute gulf that there is between God and himself, he's the potter, he's just a bit of clay. That he should have any contact whatsoever with God. He bows in worship, he puts his hand over his mouth, and he thanks God for who he is. Because he gets a glimpse of what he doesn't know. And Ecclesiastes wants to warn us against judging God by our own limited wisdom. Wouldn't it be a terrible thing if you spend your life kind of making up your mind about God, and at the end of the day you discover that he's nothing like what you thought? Here's the third thing we don't know. It's in verse 6. We don't know what will succeed. Sow your seed in the morning and evening, let your hand not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed. Now, in the context of 10th century farming, success involved more than hard work. It could be drought, you could get a swarm of locusts, an army could invade your fields. And yet, when we think about the 21st century, we're not really in control. On Tuesday, we're going to have a vote in Parliament. Nobody's got any idea what's going to happen. It could affect your job. It could affect your likelihood of being able to buy a house or whatever. It could have a massive effect on our economy. Nobody knows. We hear a lot about climate, don't we? We don't know what's going to happen. And these things affect our future. Uncertainty is not meant to paralyze us. Look at verse 4. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. God's not saying to you, oh well, you don't know the future, don't do anything. Just sit where you are. No, he says, get out into your fields. At evening, let not your hand be idle. But the Bible wants to send us in the right direction. If you went to Morton Hall for a day, there would be funerals where there would be standing room only. And people would kind of make great speeches about the person who had died and say what a wonderful person they were. There'd be other funerals that would just be maybe one or two people there. Just a box and maybe one friend. But of course, when you think about Jesus' funeral, if I can use that phrase, there weren't anybody giving great eulogies when Jesus died, were there? Most people were mocking him, abusing him. He had very few friends who were standing beside him. But of course, the whole point about Jesus is he's not thought much of in terms of this world, but his Father will raise him from the dead. And the Bible wants to say to you and to me, hey, it's not what people think of you that matters. It is what God thinks of you. It's his judgment that matters. You see, and one of the reasons that Ecclesiastes wants to say to you and to me, do you know you don't really know very much? Is because it wants to speak some surprising words into your life about God's judgment. God's judgment is not based on, have you done more good things than bad things? God's judgment will not be on the basis of, have you tried hard? Have you been a nice person? No, that will not be the question on the last day. There's a real surprise coming at the end of this chapter. So let's read the second half of the chapter and be ready for this surprise. So let's hear what he's got to say to us. Verse 7. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years anyone may live, let them enjoy them all. But let them remember the days of darkness, for there will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. You who are young, be happy while you're young. And let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart. And whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment. So then banish anxiety from your heart and cast off troubles from your body, for youth and vigour are meaningless. Now, I don't know about you, but I read that and I was quite surprised that he puts judgment and joy next door to each other. In God's scheme of things, joy is actually a big deal. Here's the question you and I are going to get asked on the last day. Just picture it. We've sung about God's holiness today. When you stand before God, what do you think God's going to say to you? Here's the question. Why didn't you enjoy my gifts? I think God might ask you that on the last day. That might be the big question. Exams are all about preparing for the right question, aren't they? And the best teachers are the ones that teach you what the question is going to be. Here's Ecclesiastes. He's the teacher, and he's saying to you, this is the question you need to get ready for. Why didn't you enjoy my gifts? Let's just think about that for a little bit. Let me tell you about one of my grandsons. His name's Nathan. He was 4 about 2 weeks ago. And he got his birthday presents. And David and Libby, his parents, had a guy living with him for a little while, lodger. His name was Attila. He does come from Hungary. He was Attila the Hun. And he wasn't there for Nathan's birthday, but the next day he brought a little present and he put it on the table. And Nathan came down in the morning and there was the present, and he got it and he opened it up, and it was a box of Lego. And he took one look at the box and he went away to play with his horses and his cows. He doesn't do Lego, he's not interested in Lego. He just likes horses and cows. Unfortunately, Attila wasn't there to see this offence. Give me my box. You do not. In fact, Margaret said to Nathan, can Hannah play with your Lego? Now, okay, that's a kind of cute little story. Let me just kind of jack it up a little bit. Maybe this is going to happen this Christmas in some houses. There's a teenage daughter. Sorry, girls, but I'm going to use you as an example. Okay? There's a teenage daughter, and the box is on the table. There you are. There's your mum and dad's present. Don't tell anybody I said that, but it's from your mum and dad. And with expectation, the box is opened up. In her head, she knows what it is. It is a mobile phone. She opens it and says nothing. It is not an iPhone. It's not even a Samsung. It is one of these bargain Motorola's. Okay? Now just stay with the illustration, okay? We've just jacked this up, and now some quite serious things are going on here. In her head, she's got words like, how embarrassing, And do you know what? That's a bit of an insult, right? We are as a prison. I'm better than that. I'm better than that, right? Do you know what the first command in the Bible is? In Genesis chapter 2, God says to the first people, "And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden." Adam, there you are. Smell the flowers, eat the fruit, enjoy the shade, picnic by the river, have a great time. That's God's first command. Hey, go and enjoy my garden. Enjoy my garden. But it's not long before they're not enjoying themselves. They have been persuaded that this whole thing is a thinly veiled plot. They are persuaded that they are being kept down by this God. They are being persuaded that they are worth more than this. You can be so much more, is the phrase that's being pursued through their heads. It is the words of the snake. And amazingly, the snake persuades the first people to think that paradise is an insult. Imagine that. God gives them paradise, and not long before they're thinking, do you know what? This is not that great. The Exodus generation, so you come on to the next book in the Bible, are rescued dramatically and wonderfully by God from death and slavery, and they're being transported to a world that's described as being marked by milk and honey. And as they make it through the first 6 weeks, they are grumbling and complaining about their treatment. They're saying things like, "God, you brought us out here to kill us." And if you scroll on for another 400 years, and you ask the question, why will this people be evicted from the land that God has given them? This is what it says in the Bible. This is what Deuteronomy says. "Because you did not serve the Lord your God joyfully and gladly in a time of prosperity." Do you get the picture? Now look back at verse 9. Pay attention. Pay attention. "You who are young, be happy while you're young. And let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart, and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you into judgment." Now when I read that, I thought, that's a strange thing that he should say that to young people, because that's what we all aspire to. We all want to be young. People dress. Old people dress as though they're young. Yeah? All that sports gear that keeps getting worn. Okay. We all aspire to, because we think that's where life is. But actually, when most of us reflect back on our days of our youth, happiness was not the word that you would have put over the top of them. They're days marked by stress, anxiety, fear that we're not in with the right group, comparisons with other people, competitiveness. That would be the characteristic of much youth culture. Not a sense that life is a generous gift from a glorious God. Here you are. Enjoy life. No, I'm really pretty fed up with life, actually. I don't fancy it that much. That's been one of the big themes of Ecclesiastes, isn't it? Enjoy God's gifts. Let me just get back into this. I'm going to just read a few verses from the book that we've travelled our way through. So 2:24, "A person can do nothing better than eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. Then I saw there is nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. This is what I observed to be good, that it's appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labour. Go, eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Is that the characteristic of your life? Let me just finish this talk by kind of picking out 3 practical things. Okay? Am I somebody who can just appreciate God's everyday gifts? To eat a meal with a family or with my friends without wondering what other people are eating and who's getting invited where. Just sheer delight that God has put daily bread on my table out of his love and concern for me. He has provided for our needs. Does it result in me lifting my heart in genuine gratitude to God for his absolute faithfulness to us at that level? Is the melody that runs through my life one of gratitude or complaint? Just think about it. God's everyday benefits. Can I sit at a table with my kids or whatever and say, thank you, Lord, for all this? But of course, in God's scheme of things, it's not just about... Joy is not something that is just a product of what you get. It's also discovering what we give. So if you look back to the first 2 verses, and I'm going to read these verses in a slightly more literal translation. This is what these verses say. Cast your bread on the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. Now, the words I want to just get in your head there are the first words in both of those verses. So, cast and give. The first verse is not the kind of most straightforward, cast your bread in the waters, but just kind of focus just now on that idea of casting and giving. Jesus not only ate meals with his friends, but he also hosted meals. 5,000 people enjoy his generosity. Rosario Butterfield is the wife of a minister in North Carolina. And she and her husband on a Thursday open their house for the community, and on a Sunday they open their house for people from church, and you don't have to book. You just turn up from the community. She says, this is what she said: when we're too functional, we forget the point of hospitality, fellowship, not entertainment. Don't let pride stop you from opening your home. Ignore the cat hair on the couch, in brackets, or in the mac and cheese. It likely won't kill anyone as decisively as loneliness will. An idea of generosity. Okay. Here's a little clip from Corrie ten Boom's life. Anybody know Corrie ten Boom? You know, she was in Holland. She was eventually taken to concentration camps for harbouring Jews. But she writes this about her father, Caspar ten Boom. Every morning he read one chapter of the Old Testament to his family, and in the evening one from the New Testament. But because he was the neighbourhood watchmaker, he often had clients or other people from the neighbourhood at his table, believers and unbelievers, Gentiles and Jews, rich and poor. They ate, they talked, they listened to Scripture, and God used the time they invested in this way to build community. You see, you get something back. So Caspar's casting his bread on the water. You come and sit at my table, and then something's going to come back. This is what it says. When unmitigated evil unleashed itself on Holland, they already had a community in place, carved out of neighbours, Scripture, doing life together. They didn't know what for, but they were ready, first in their homes, than in Hitler's concentration camps. That's the principle he's talking about. He's saying, as we learn to give, so there is some unexpected returns. We're able to rejoice in God's ordering, in his strategies, in his goodness. Here's the last thing. Okay. Presently, we're going to effectively, as it were, sit at this table. We're going to be God's guests. And we're going to be invited to enjoy his hospitality. This meal that is composed of the benefits of the death of his Son. So God says, taste again the joy of forgiveness. My Son has paid the debt. Enjoy. Enjoy forgiveness. My Son has paid the price. Here's costly pardon that will take off your shoulders the guilt and shame that comes with sin. Let me take it off your shoulders here, so that you can function and rejoice. Here is the promise of a place in my house, that as you sit at my table now, so one day you will sit in my house and enjoy my everlasting hospitality. All because the Father's Son was prepared to be cast out of that house. So will I simply eat the bread and wine today in that kind of dutiful spirit that says, well, it's the first Sunday of the month or the second Sunday of the month or whatever it is, and this is what we do at Graceland, we do this, and then we move on? Or will my heart sing today at what God has done for us? Will I be overjoyed? The God who made the universe found a way to take me from being his enemy and make me his friend. Take me from being at enmity with him and sit me at his table as his much-loved Son. I rejoice in those things. Last verse. So then, banish anxiety from your heart. The word is actually vexation. It means annoyance, grumpiness, injustice. Will you banish that out of your life? They are down a little bit there. And cast off troubles of your body. I don't quite know what that is meant to mean, other than please stop talking about your aches and pains. We don't want to hear it. Let's rejoice in what God has done for us. That will be the question on the last day. Why didn't you rejoice in what I did for you in Christ? Yeah? I want to be somebody who lives like that. That's the goal of God's great work of salvation, to make us happy. To make us happy in Jesus.